Howdy hey everybody. You probably know me from my YouTube shorts, but I've gotten so many requests to make a full-length video on my designs, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. This video won't really serve as a comprehensive tutorial on how to make a space plane. It'll be more so like a tips and tricks video for someone who sort of knows what they're doing but would like to get better. So with that, we're going to get right into the first point, the most important one: center of lift, center of mass, center of thrust. These three little dots that you see here in the corner. You can toggle them on just by clicking them. These are your center of lift in blue, center of mass in yellow, and center of thrust in this sort of pinkish purplish color. So part of the reason why space planes are so much more complicated than conventional rockets is that you have to worry about center of lift in addition to center of thrust and mass. Most of the time, your rocket is symmetrical, so these things don't really even matter, and a lot of players can get away with not even looking at these. A good way to visualize this is by thinking of a dart. You want to, of course, have your dart travel forwards, so you put your fins near the back, and if you move them to the front, it wants to fly backwards. This is why on some reusable rockets they have control surfaces near the top, because traveling backwards is exactly what they want to do during the landing burn. For an airplane though, putting your wings all the way at the back would make it stable, but it would be extremely hard to control. A big mistake many players make on space planes is putting the center of lift too far behind the center of mass, making the craft want to nosedive, especially on re-entry. Or they place the center of lift completely in front of the center of mass. This causes the plane to want to travel backwards, similar to that dart analogy. Something to keep in mind is that your center of mass can change by a lot when your propellant tanks drain. Make sure you keep this in mind when placing your aerodynamic surfaces. You're most likely going to want to optimize for when your tanks are nearly empty, since this is usually when you're coming in to re-enter and land. The ideal placement for the center of lift on a plane is slightly behind the center of mass. The closer it is, the more maneuverable it'll be. Part of the reason why I love feather systems so much, yep, you know I'm getting into feather systems, is that this takes the idea of putting the center of lift behind and above the center of mass and cranks it up to 11. When deployed, the center of travel during re-entry is between the center of mass and the center of lift, like that dart analogy. Except instead of wanting to travel forwards, the dart wants to belly flop, the best position for re-entry. And when you want to fly like normal, you can just rotate the feather back to normal and glide like any other space plane. Just make sure the center of mass and lift are the way they should be in this mode as well. By the way, this idea isn't actually my own. This is an actual system on the real space planes, Spaceship 1 and Spaceship 2, and it works in the exact same way. Next, I'm going to go over a couple general design things that I like to use on my space planes. The goal of this video is to inspire you to make your own designs and make sure that they're functional. So this isn't going to be a full build tutorial for some of the things I'm showing you. It's more so just some cool ideas that maybe you can incorporate. If you do want an up-close look at these planes to like play around with them or something, I will be putting a link to download them in the description of this video though. Anyway, going back to the feather system, I get tons of questions asking how it stays on there so well without ripping off. So here's the method. Attach all the parts to the hinge directly. Do not connect them to the wing. This makes the wing less prone to getting ripped off. You can also auto strut them, but make sure it's only to the hinge and not any of the non-moving parts. By the way, these are just the DLC hinges from the Breaking Ground expansion. Anyway, let's get on to the general tips and tricks. This first little tip is very useful even in stock. Most of the time, if you're building large space planes, the wings look way too thin, like they could snap off at any moment. The big space shuttle wings are a little better, but they're kind of generic and limit you to only space shuttle looking builds. So I've developed this little trick that I haven't really seen that often, and I think it's pretty useful. Try outlining the shape of your wing in small diameter fuel tanks. These longer ones that are added in the restock mod are very useful for this. Then with 2 layers of wings, put one on the top and one at the bottom. It's probably a good idea to put the tanks at angles that the wings come in so they match up cleanly. Do be careful though, this technique causes a lot of drag and I'd only recommend this for space planes. You could probably push through it if you had a high thrust design on a conventional plane though. Perhaps one of my most frequently asked questions is how do I put heat shields on my space planes? The trick with this is the conformal decals mod. You don't need a special text or anything, I simply just use the text tool, type in the letter I, and enlarge it. Make sure the depth, size, and cutoff is set to high, especially on larger curved parts. I also typically turn down the opacity. This matches up well with parts that already suggest heat shields, like this near future spacecraft part that I use pretty often. I also recommend saving this as a subassembly. Next time you need a heat shield, just grab it from your subassembly menu. I also recommend putting on the heat shields last. They have big hitboxes and tend to interfere with stuff that you've already placed. This is a bit more specific to smaller spaceplanes that use Mark II parts. When these parts were designed, there was some very intentional geometry put into these. These two sides are actually parallel to each other, meaning that if one is horizontal, they'll both be. There's all kinds of potential for cool looking designs with this technique. This spaceplane that you've probably seen in some of my YouTube shorts is called Zephyr. It's one of my favorite designs, and if you look at it from the front or back, you'll probably notice I use that technique here. And the link to download this craft file is in the description if you want to play around with it. Something else that really stands out about this spaceplane is its launch system. The booster has a similar cross-section, and I'm using these big wing pieces to achieve a seamless interstage. But with all these wing parts up near the top, my center of lift is above my center of mass, as would be the case with most rocket-launched spaceplanes like this. How do I launch this thing? Here's another tip. You can still get away with launching unstable things like this if you have the right flight profile. If you delay your gravity turn until super late and the atmosphere is thinner and your first stage is lighter, you can get to orbit without flipping around. Also, putting big control surfaces near the bottom of the booster helps. If it's still too unstable, you could side mount the tank like on your classic space shuttle, but this is a pretty complicated thing to master, and to be honest, I've never really been a big fan of the way this looks. Here's a technique that I use pretty often. Put your external tank directly on top of your spaceplane. It keeps the center of lift below the center of mass, and you don't have to worry about your center of thrust being off like with a side-mounted tank. If you don't have a connection point at the top of your spaceplane, just add a hidden structural piece embedded into your plane, and move the decoupler to where it needs to be by holding shift when you translate it. Make sure the arrows are facing towards the spaceplane so this ring section stays with the tank and not with the plane. So, those are just some general spaceplane tips and tricks that I've learned in my time playing KSP. Thank you for watching, I hope you learned a few things from this. Special announcement, I'm making a KSP multiplayer server that's going to be coming out pretty soon. I'm going to make a whole series on that, I might stream, who knows. We got some really cool applicants into the thing, and if you want to play on that server, I have a link to that. I think it's my latest YouTube post. By the way, if you're watching this like a long time after I posted this, it's probably not applicable anymore, sorry if this age is bad. But if you're watching this early, check that out if that feels interesting to you. I'll see you later. Goodbye.